goes through the different reasonings behind the designs and also what they're called. Wattle and Dove houses. Return to Mordheim. For me,
Leif, you beautiful, beautiful man. This is a great idea. Sure would be a shame if somebody stole it. Seriously though, Leif is an amazing crafter, like amazing. And I am gonna steal the idea. So, let's go. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Garmin. This is the Storycraft Society, and this week I was getting super inspired to craft by watching Leif over at the YouTube channel Devs and Dice. Now, specifically the video that got me going was this video on Mordheim terrain, and it's this three-piece building where you've got the two high buildings on either side with the little building in the middle. Now, he made his to be ruins, and all I could think to myself, absolutely all that I could think to myself was, I need to rip this off and make my own version of it. Leif is such an awesome inspiration, and obviously all of his crafting speaks for itself, so that made me want to craft. What more can you ask for out of a YouTuber? So with that said, let's dive into how I took Leif's project and I made it my own. Let's go. All right, so when I get started on a blatant ripoff project like this, I really like to draw inspiration not only from the thing that I'm ripping off, but also from myself and the things that make my crafting me. So to start this off, I pulled out a couple of buildings from my pre-existing collection, and I started to arrange them in a way that I could look at them and see what makes me, but also what will work to make something that looks like what Leif did. The idea that I ended up coming up with was this cool double slanted roof where they're kind of going different directions, so that pushes and pulls the eye a little bit. It makes it more exciting, that it's got a bunch of different ways that you could look at it, and when you place it on the table in different scenes, you can orient the building in different directions to get a different look. Now, using these previous buildings as scale, I used them to start to cut out my template idea for what the new building was going to look like. So obviously I knew that I wanted to do that tall, short, tall thing that was part of Leif's awesome build, but I wanted to make sure that I got the scale right so that it matched my other buildings. Once I got that all figured out, I cut the pieces out and began assembling them. So using pins, I was able to put the piece together and get a quick idea before I glued it to know that this was the direction that I wanted to go, any last minute changes that I wanted to make. And I did take as much inspiration as I could from Leif. So for example, the building on the left was going to be 3 stories just like his, and the building on the far right, slightly less tall, but it was going to have the overhang that Leif did. But instead of doing the overhang in the front, I turned it out and put it on the outside. That's just a little bit of me peeking through and taking his idea and making it my own. But once I got that all set in stone, I pulled out my hot glue gun and I glued them together, and I actually used some EPS foam. That's the cheap packing foam that breaks up into the little white balls. I used that as a substructure strengthener because the foam core can be a little weak, so it's nice to just add a little bit of strength inside. So to make the roof substructure, I pulled out some cheap corrugated cardboard and I just cut that down into shape and glued it in place. Now, what I used for this was PVA glue as well as pins to lock it down and make sure that that bond is nice and perfect. So now with the substructure all done, it was time to start looking back at Leif's project and start pulling ideas for inspiration for the windows and doors. Now, an obvious example of this is on the left building where I put 1 window in the middle floor and then 2 windows on the top floor, but I also have a lot of things that I did differently, like offsetting the door at the bottom a little bit off to the left, and I totally changed up the middle building because for my version, it's only going to be 1 story instead of Leif's 2-story version. Just because of the little changes that I made, certain things had to be moved around and made a little different, and that's what I like about doing a project like this. It ends up becoming so much my own, even though someone else's idea really is what anchored all of the excitement in the first place. Now that the substructure is all done, it was time to cut about 10 million billion gazillion little bricks timbers, rafters, beams, windowsills, all these sorts of things needed to be cut up, and I needed a lot of them. So the trick that I utilize the most when I need to get something like this done is to knock it out in one fell swoop. If I get it done, I can get into a groove, get it knocked out quickly, and then I'm done. So I just crank up some tunes and get stuck in. And it's always important that you sing along.
Kept saying I just wanted to see you, saying what's wrong with that needle, shaking out lines in a compass.
So if that singing didn't totally turn you off to the music that was playing in my headphones, I will tell you that it was Pine Grove, which is one of my absolute favorite bands. Don't let the singing turn you off. Pine Grove, check them out. Really, really, really awesome stuff. So now with that massive step done, let's throw it back to a bearded past Garmin to see some insight on where he is right now in the project. So if you're making like your first building or something, this is a point that I hit with almost every build that is more complicated than just like a simple tiny house or something. And I get overwhelmed because once you hit a certain point, so many things require you doing the next thing to be able to do it. So for example, with this where it is now, I keep going, well, I'm gonna put the horizontal pieces in. And then I think to myself, well, no, the verticals all have to go in first.
But then, yeah, the verticals have to go in, but before I put the verticals in, I have to put the horizontal pieces around the roof in first. And then after I think about that, then I'm like, well, before I put the horizontal pieces around the roof, I've got to get these wings, the eaves that stick out over top. And then when I think about that, I need the beams that go across up top.
It just gets overwhelming. It feels really, really, it feels like you get overwhelmed. And the trick here is don't care so much. That sounds like a huge cop-out, but it's really true. Just pick something, start working on it, and know that you'll be able to fix it and add pieces and cut away pieces and things later, and they will certainly make it all easier on you when you get into a jam. Push through. That is the trick tip here. So as I began gluing down the beams and timbers, I tried to keep my own advice in mind, as well as look at Leif's buildings for examples for inspiration, just like I did for the windows and doors. Believe it or not, this is my favorite part of this process. I just absolutely love getting to add pieces and add pieces and add pieces and see the building come to life. I think it comes to life so fast in this step, and that's what really makes me enjoy this particular process. And then by the time you have all the timbers and stuff on and done, you just feel like you really accomplished something, or at least I certainly do. Now for the timber patterns, I used Leif's pattern as much as I possibly could. So for example, on the Leftern building, I have these diagonals here. On the right building, I have the crisscrosses, and I even have the up and down pattern on the middle building. I just have it on the back side instead of on the front. Wait, what's that? Okay, I'll let him know. So actually, I just got word that Past Bearded Garmin has an update for you. Let's throw it back to him. The bits somehow get worse. Good morning. It is the next morning. We finally have all of our timbers done, which is great. Just like Leif said in his video, the timbers are the way that you can really show off your artistry on a build like this. And I think that whereas that certainly takes a lot of time, the end result is always super, super fun and spectacular to look at because the building starts to look, you know, the way it's supposed to look. So with that said, it is now time for us to move on to doing the stucco. So the way that I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna pull out my quick setting tile grout. So since I actually haven't talked about it on the channel here for a while, I figured this would be a good opportunity to just kind of quickly go over again how I do my stucco. So the first part that's really important is you want to get it to a consistency that it is not runny, but it's not super solid. Once you have that, I like to take two tools, and then what you do is you you just take one tool to kind of push the tile grout down into the area where you're going to work, and then just use your tool until you get it to fill the little area that you're working on. I try to be a little extra careful because cleaning it up is not super fun. You can clean it up, and certainly once you paint it, it gets a little easier. It's easier if you just don't have to deal with it in the first place, and that's kind of my motto when doing this. So I'm gonna get the rest of this thing knocked out, and then we'll check in when we're done. So this is just another decently long process filled to the brim with the dreaded dry time. Dry time. But I will say that once it's all done and dry, this step always looks so awesome. Just absolutely brings the whole piece together. And I don't know if it's the fact that I'm using this like stucco colored tile grout or what it is, but boy, this is the step where I think every time I do a project like this, it really just locks together and becomes the thing that I'm trying to make, right? I love this step so much. Once it's done. In the middle of it, I like the timbers better. But once it's done, this is such an awesome. Now next, and for the final part of this sculpt, I needed to do the roof slats, I guess is the right term. I don't like to do shingles. I've done them. I much prefer to do it this way. They look almost as good and take a lot less effort. So I'm sticking with the roof slats for now. But what I needed to do here was cut up a bunch of these roof slats. I made them in 3 different sizes so each roof would have its own individual feel, and then I started to lay them down. The way that I put them in place is I put them all down differently. This one right here is actually vertical, whereas the other 2 are horizontal. That way I've got a nice visual difference when I'm looking over top of the building to see which one is which, and it just gives the eye a little bit of extra push and pull. And actually right in the middle of when I was working on this building over here, I had a little past garment update. I actually ran out of full long strips, so I ended up having to cut some of the scrap to end up making these. But that's actually really easy. Anything is fixable with foam. That's why I really like working with it. So what that will allow me to do is basically make like a patch that will fit onto the roof like that. And that should look really, really, really good. And it'll add a little bit of character to an otherwise sort of bland roof. So with the 3 roofs finished, the sculpt was done. And it is starting to look so great. And now I move on to the part that I hate more than anything. And every time I get to it, I dread it and don't want to do it. And luckily these videos, and you fine folks, make me have to do it so it doesn't sit on my shelf in an unfinished version for ages waiting for me to paint it. So I'm going to start this off by putting a layer of Blackmagic Craft base coat over the whole thing. For those who don't know, that is just a 50-50 mixture of black acrylic craft paint and matte Mod Podge. And what that does for me is it strengthens up all of my foam as well as gives me a nice flat black undercoat to start painting up from for all of my different textures. I painted the timbers in basic browns. There is nothing exciting here. If you want to check out my Lazy Crafter's Guide to Painting Terrain video, that will tell you exactly how I did those. But the real juice for this project doesn't come from the timbers. No, it comes from the stucco. And this is another thing that made me fall so in love with Leif's version. He did a red building on the left, a cream building in the middle, and a green building on the outside that he said was to be like an opulent, more upscale, rich looking city. And I love that idea. I love it. And that's one of the reasons that it made me so excited to make this project. So now I had to do it and I had to paint it myself, which I liked a lot less. The way that I did it was I started by putting a deep dark red over on the Leftern building, followed up by a really watered down brighter red. This gives me what I felt was a very visually diverse red color. I'm not totally sold on the way that this looks, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily from my paint job or if that's from specifically the way that I applied the tile grout, that it just didn't give me a really exciting texture. I'm not 100% sure what I don't love about this, but it looks good enough and it will be fine on the tabletop. For the building on the far right, I used a dark forest green, and actually I ended up only doing 2 2 coats on this of one color because it looked so great. I was afraid to mess with adding another color to it in the chance that I might ruin it. And lastly, I did a very boring but effective cream colored paint job on the middle building. Lastly, for the roof, I wanted to honor Leif's amazing blue slate roof. The thing is that I wasn't doing slate tiles for my roof. That wasn't tiles, shingles. Boy, this was going pretty good, and now it's I did wood slats. So them being blue didn't make a whole lot of sense, but I wanted them to be blue anyway. So what did I do? I threw caution to the wind. I said, heck it, I'm gonna put blue on my wood. Ooh. But guess what? It turned out awesome. I started with a dark blue as my undercoat, and then I did a overbrushing of a like mid-tone to slightly lighter blue, and this looks so good. It doesn't necessarily look realistic, but that's not really what I care about. I really want it to just look good on the table, and I feel like that's exactly what happened. Now, to keep the visual diversity up, I did paint the center roof in a more traditional aged wood color. That way it wasn't just blue, blue, blue. I had a little bit in there. With that said, I am so stoked for how the roof ended up turning out. But there you go. The project was finished, and I am as pleased with this as I could possibly be, other than the red stucco. Red stucco, meh. I got the windows and doors all finished up, and then I was ready to take a final look at this thing, and boy, I'm just so pleased. Ripping people off is my favorite way to get excited about the hobby, and I think that there's a lot of people out there who think that the arts isn't about ripping everybody else off, but it really is. I think it gets really scummy when you rip somebody off and maybe don't tip your hat to them. Leif, buddy, I'm looking at you. Amazing work. Wouldn't have this without you. That's really what's important, is looking at other people for inspiration and how you can grow as a crafter. So, with that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video, how to rip somebody off in 30 steps or less. And if you did, definitely consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this content. Leave me a comment down below and say hello if you're new, or just your favorite way to rip somebody off. That's all I have for this week. So thank you so much for watching. Until next week, I'll be seeing you.